Well, John Burke, it is super exciting to reconnect with you and have you on today. A lot to talk about. We're going to talk about near-death experiences. And I know this is a loaded question because it's a complicated backstory, but what was it that motivated you, that drove you to want to tackle NDEs?
Well, it was kind of an accident. I was an agnostic. Grew up going to church, but I ended up studying engineering and working as an engineer. So my mind has always worked like that, like skeptical. How do you know? Is there any evidence? Why does that make sense? And nobody could really answer my question. So I just decided Jesus is probably a good man who turned legend, and God, you just can't know. There's no evidence. And then my dad was dying of cancer. And, this is almost 40 years ago. And someone gave him the very first research on near death experience. So, coined the term near death experience, which, if you don't know what that is, it's when people clinically die. So, like, even no heartbeat, no brain waves for minutes to hours. And yet they're resuscitated either by modern medicine or, quite honestly, some cases just miracle, because there's no way you can't explain it any other way. But I saw this book on his bedside table, and I pick it up and I'm curious. I start reading it and I couldn't put it down. And at the end, I said, oh my gosh, like this might be the evidence I've been looking for. And because so many of them, they talk about how they were in a place more real than this, more alive than this, and many times in the presence of this God of light and love, who was personal, who knew them intimately. They never wanted to leave his presence. Many of them knew this was Jesus or saw him as Jesus. And again, I'm a skeptic and an agnostic. I'm like, what? And it was just enough. It didn't convince me. It just opened my mind. And because of that, I actually started reading the Bible and studying the Bible. And after a year or so, for other reasons, actually for fulfilled prophecy in history that I didn't know was there either, I came to faith in Christ. So, and the weird thing is, I just kept my curiosity was insatiable. I was always like, the more I learned about the Bible and studied, and then I kept running into more of these stories, which, interestingly, God, I believe, I was working as an engineer out in Santa Barbara, California, which ended up to be the hub of the research that the medical doctors, who were the first researchers, where they were studying most of the patients. So yes, coincidentally, I kept running into them, and I kept, and the way my mind would go, I'd be like, wait, I heard that. And that person talked about a life review, and that person talked about this. And I see that's where Jesus said this and I literally started charting it. And I gave my first talk on this at the University of California, Santa Barbara in 1989. So I've studied close to 1,500 cases of clinical death and resuscitation since then. And, in 2015, I wrote the book Imagine Heaven, really showing how there are about 40 commonalities of what people say, and all 40 are found in the Bible. And and then a year and a half ago, I wrote Imagine the God of Heaven, really honing in on how people all over the globe, 70 people I interviewed on every continent, every religious background, but they're encountering the same God. And it's the God who revealed himself in the Jewish prophets and through Jesus. And I'm just basically showing how the character and the attributes of who they're experiencing fully aligns.
One of the things that I really love, and I don't know the statistics, and I know that you do, is how many people basically in any given day around the globe die, and then how many of those have a near death experience. I think it was like 5% or something, but do you recall this statistic?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Gallup poll did a survey of America and found 1 out of 25 Americans. So that's like 13 million Americans claims to have had a near-death experience. more recently in 2019, the European Academy of Neurology reported on a study across 35 countries. They said that 10% of the population across 35 countries has had a near-death experience. Now, I still think it's more like 5%, because when I dove into the data, the ones who were actually at or near clinical death, more like 5%. So here's the thing, like, I'm still a skeptic. So if someone has an experience and they call it a near-death experience, but they're not really clinically dead or very, very close, I'm kind of like, I don't know, maybe. I mean, you kind of got to take their word, but
Or is it a vision? Is it a vision at that point, right? Is it some sort of, and maybe God gave it to them, right?
it could be, but I got to tell you, when they show you scars in their neck where the knife went in here and came out there, or the bullet wounds, or hospital records, dead an hour and 45 minutes, well, that to me has a lot more like, okay, tell me what you have to say.
Yeah, exactly. So 4% of Americans on average, because 1 in 25 is what you said, and then like about 10 global, but we're thinking like 5 is a fair assessment.
I think 4 to 5% is 1 out of 20, 1 out of 25.
Just still like thousands of people a day across the globe that are experiencing this. And one of the things I love about your books, and I really appreciate about your skepticism, is that you note in these books that I'm obsessed with that you only really take the testimonies of people who have a lot to lose. So they're not people that are telling this story because, oh, they're going to be gaining fame or their moment in the spotlight. These are people, lawyers, doctors. I recall one was an astronaut or something like that, an aerospace, physicist or something like that, where you're assuming people would.
Yeah, lawyer, aerospace engineer, surgeons, bank presidents. I mean, you don't typically have.
I mean, a normal person who has a steady job doesn't want to say, I died and went to heaven or I died and went to hell, because you sound insane.
No.
And so I love that these are the testimonies that you've included in here, because they understand, they have such conviction about what they experienced that they're willing to.
Well, they have a lot to lose.
They have a lot to lose. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with this, because you have, I mean, even within the church, and you know this, John, because you've gotten this reaction from people too. There are people who will say this is not biblical, this is not true, this is not, and I want to get into all this, but it makes it hard to share the stories, A, because they feel strange, Jen, like what you were just saying, but B, when even the people in your own camp who should support what you may be saying, and again, we should have skepticism always and vet things, they're coming after you.